The South Korean people have been waiting for a peace treaty since 1953. About 25 million people live in Greater Seoul, the capital. Nothing in the life of this vibrant metropolis betrays the fact that South Korea is still at war with North Korea. Even though the division is no longer visible in everyday life, it still preoccupies people to a greater or lesser degree, depending on their age, as discussions with South Koreans reveal.
Even though theoretically we are still at war, we hardly feel it in everyday life. 70 years have passed, after all, since the Korean peninsula was divided into two countries, and this is already the third post-war generation. This is why we hardly remember the war.
굉장히 가슴이 아파요. 이런 현실 속에서 우리들이 살아가고 있다는 거.
It is heartbreaking to live in a reality like this. Despite the liberation from Japan in 1945, we are now experiencing the painful condition that the division of the country has brought about. All of my mother's relatives, for example, live in North Korea.
살고 있습니다. 근데 이런
We drive from Seoul to Panmunjom, which lies on the demarcation line. Here, South and North Korean soldiers face one another so closely that they could touch if they wanted to. There is no fence, but a line on the ground that keeps them apart. Since 1953, Swiss soldiers have been here to monitor the ceasefire. A glance at history. For the Koreans, the Korean peninsula forms a single whole, owing to its situation, the common language and culture. After the Japanese surrendered in 1945, Korea was divided into two occupied zones along the 38th parallel, an American zone in the south and a Soviet zone in the north. In 1948, both parts proclaimed their status as independent states. On the 25th of June 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel in an attempt to bring about the reunification of Korea by force. The UN Security Council decided to support South Korea and adopted a resolution on the 7th of July 1950 which entrusted the US with the command of a unified force, the United Nations Command, or UNC for short. The UN flag was approved as the symbol of the military alliance in support of South Korea. On the 27th of July 1953, after 3 years at war, which claimed about 4 million lives, the supreme commanders of the two warring parties signed a ceasefire. A joint armistice commission called the Military Armistice Commission was established to ensure that both armed forces adhered to the provisions of the treaty. In addition, the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, NNSC, was established to carry out specific control, monitor, and inspection duties. The United Nations Command entrusted Switzerland and Sweden with the task, and North Korea settled for Poland and Czechoslovakia. All 4 countries were considered neutral because they had not contributed combat forces to the Korean War. 96 Swiss soldiers were trained, equipped and armed. Their families and Federal Councillor Cobalt personally saw them off at Dubendorf Air Base. For more than 60 years now, the NNSC has been monitoring the ceasefire treaty. Why is Switzerland's presence still important?
It
is much appreciated that even 62 years after the mission was launched, it is still taken seriously and that it still contributes to peace and stability in this highly complex and important area from the military, security policy, and economic perspectives, although a peace treaty has never been signed.
Just 5 Swiss and 5 Swedish officers are monitoring the ceasefire in Panmunjom. How come?
It's hard to say that we can defend the border, but I met one of the South Korean generals, and he said that because you are a political tool, North Korea knows about you, everyone knows about you, so you are more important and you can have a better impact than 3 more South Korean divisions. And then we talk about 50,000 people.
The 5 Swiss officers are stationed together with the Swedish officers at a camp in Panmunjom. The living quarters and working barracks are only a few meters from the demarcation line. With their daily presence, they show that the ceasefire agreement is still valid, even though no peace treaty has been signed. Crossing the Blue Bridge, the NNSC members have direct access to the Blue negotiation barracks that are situated right on the demarcation line. The weekly meetings that take place here are prepared by the Swiss and the Swedish NNSC secretaries in turns.
We are preparing the documents for the weekly meeting. We'll present all the feedback we have received in the past 7 days at the meeting, and then discuss them.
Even though North Korea has not attended these weekly meetings since 1995, it is still very important that we hold them.
Gentlemen, the 3,446 NNSC meetings.
They signal that we still continue to fulfill the duties that were set out in the ceasefire treaty. Nevertheless, the political changes have affected the NNSC members' job.
Mein erster Einsatz hat hier begonnen im Herbst 1992.
My first deployment here began in autumn 1992. I was a very young officer when I joined the delegation as quartermaster. I've experienced the commission as it was from the 1960s to the 80s.
Wir hatten zum Beispiel als NNSC-Mitglieder.
For example, as NNSC members, we were allowed to cross the demarcation line. Polish and Czech soldiers were stationed here permanently as well. And we met in this joint security area on a daily basis.
Und wir haben uns täglich hier in dieser Joint Security Area getroffen.
My second deployment was in 2002 to 2003. We were then barred access to cross into North Korea, as North Korea no longer recognized the NNSC.
Nicht mehr in den nordkoreanischen Teil der JSA gelangen.
For this reason, our primary task was to mark our presence in order to underline that the ceasefire treaty was still valid. However, we were no longer active, really.
Stillstandsabkommen noch gültig ist, aber wir waren hier nicht mehr wirklich aktiv. Und jetzt beim dritten Einsatz ist es so.
Now, on my third deployment, we can contribute much more again to supporting the ceasefire and stabilize the situation by carrying out several additional tasks.
Unser Beitrag zur Stabilisierung der Lage.
Since 2010, one of the tasks has been to take part in inspecting the guard and observation posts along the demarcation line. Twice a year, the Ceasefire Commission of the South, the UNCMAC, inspects each post. They verify adherence to the ceasefire treaty by checking the number of stationed soldiers and their weapons. The NNSC checks whether these inspections are carried out correctly.
In a UNC guard post within the DMZ, and their role is to observe the situation here, that nothing unusual would happen, whatever the exact mandate would be.
The guard and observation posts are located along the 241-kilometre-long demarcation line, which stretches right across the Korean peninsula. 1,300 simple marking signs are installed along the line at regular distances. From each point on the demarcation line, the demilitarized zone DMZ stretches 2 kilometers to the north and 2 kilometers to the south. Initially, the DMZ served to separate the combat forces along the front, but today it has become one of the most heavily armed areas in the world. Mines make passing through impossible. There is one single village on the South Korean side of the DMZ, Taesongdong. It was inaugurated in 1953, after the ceasefire was signed, and South Korea considers it to be a symbol of freedom and democracy. According to official sources, the population is 225, and the people live from agriculture. But not a soul is to be seen, except for a few South Korean soldiers who observe the village. The schoolhouse is the only busy place. The school children are having fun outside during PE class. When we leave the village, we see no one on the streets or in the fields. The situation at the bus parking lot next to Infiltration Tunnel 3 and at Observation Post Dora is completely different. These are accessible to tourists who travel here in buses. Every day, as many as 5,000 tourists take advantage of the good view from Observation Post Dora to North Korea. There's not much to be seen, a barren landscape and the village Kijongdong that lies in the demilitarization zone. It is so close and yet so far. The distance seemed to become shorter just shortly before the change of the millennium. In April 2000, a meeting between North and South Korean diplomats took place in Panmunjom. In August 2000, South and North Korean families could reunite for the first time after having been separated for decades. In 2003, as tension decreased, an industrial complex was built in Kaesong, North Korea, right outside of the DMZ. Some 53,000 North and 1,200 South Koreans work here and produce goods for the South. The South Koreans have to pass this transit office. Some 700 lorries undergo strict controls here every day. They transport raw materials to Kaesong and deliver the manufactured products to South Korea. For a short time, the raw materials and goods were transported through Dorasan train station, which was built in 2002. Today the building looks spooky. Empty platforms with tracks that lead to no man's land in both directions. When will the next train come through here heading to the north? We're at the US Yongsan military base, which is located in the middle of Seoul. This is the starting point of another additional task. Since 2010, the NNSC has been participating as observer in monthly helicopter flights. The destination is the only airfield that the United Nations Command is authorized to operate within the DMZ.
We from the NNSC are invited to these observation flights as an independent institution. My job is to make sure that no one aboard is armed and that the flight path is flown as defined.
Usually, one Swiss and one Swedish NNSC officer, as well as representatives of the Ceasefire Commission, take part in these helicopter flights. At Yongsan Base, we meet up again with Major Marco Beccini. His job as secretary is to carry out the routine tasks according to the NNSC mandate. He meets the American UNCMAC liaison officer once a week for a consultation meeting and to exchange information. After the preparation, they go together to the meeting with the American representative in charge of the military personnel. He shows Major Bacchini the number of foreign military personnel who enter and leave South Korea. The NNSC needs these numbers in order to fulfill their mandate in accordance with the ceasefire treaty. The Swiss contribution in the context of the NNSC is highly appreciated internationally.
The members of the Swiss delegation, I can tell you without a doubt, are highly respected. One of their strengths is their experience and exposure in the multinational operations. And they're all experts and very keen, have very keen knowledge of military weapon systems, as well as military tactics, techniques, and procedures that bring instant credibility to their mission here and the armistice enforcement.
중립국감독위원회는 우리 한반도를 향한
The NNSC is an organization that stands for freedom and stability, and for hope and development on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, I think the NNSC should maintain its important role by all means until lasting peace is ensured.
그 중요한 역할을 계속 수행해야 된다고 저는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
I belong to UNCMAC, okay? It's United Nations Command Military Armistice Commission. And so when you look at it, when the war was fought, UNC was a combatant. So we're a section of UNC that's tasked to maintain the armistice. And someone could look at that and say, how can you be a combatant and then be trying to maintain the peace? So by having the NNSC there to observe what we do and vouch for the fact that we are doing it in accordance with the Armistice Agreement and filing their independent reports, I think it adds a lot of credibility to the whole mission here.
Another additional task is to observe the joint military exercises of the United Nations Command and the South Korean Armed Forces. Here, the job of the NNSC is to check that the exercises are exclusively geared to defence. Also new since 2010 is the increasing involvement in the education and further training of the South Korean Armed Forces. NNSC members give around 40 lectures annually to explain the tasks and the importance of the NNSC. The Swiss Embassy is an important partner for the Swiss officers on location. Once a month, the head of the Swiss delegation meets the ambassador in Seoul. The ambassador explains why the cooperation with the Swiss NNSC representatives is so important.
For me, as a diplomat, this is very interesting. It is an additional resource with which we can contribute to Swiss-Korean bilateral relations, where we can prove that we have been present here day and night for the past 60 years for the purpose of contributing to stability on the Korean Peninsula. But it's also interesting for us at the international level. We are an instrument of the ceasefire, here involved on behalf of the UN. This helps us to further develop international contacts.
Hilft uns dabei, die internationalen Kontakte weiter zu vertiefen.
In South Korea, you can see sculptures everywhere that portray the separation and the desire for reunification. The separation has provoked strong feelings.
I feel very complex feelings, frustration, and pity, and sadness, and anxiousness. For both North and South Koreans, their life and their thoughts, range of freedom and imagination were affected by the division, distorted, or sacrificed. So I hope both North and South Koreans should go forward for reconciliation and towards unification.
Until this happens, the NNSC plays an important role.
It is absolutely crucial that the NNSC remains here in Korea because it upholds the armistice as it was established. It was created, the NNSC was created here as a commission to fulfill a role. And so the ability of, the willingness of the Swiss and the Swedes to continue to fulfill that role gives strength and credence to the body of the entire armistice as it holds it together in its totality.
Since 1953, Swiss and Swedish officers have been deployed to the NNSC. It's the oldest peace support mission of the Swiss Armed Forces and is regarded as the cradle of Swiss military peace support. By maintaining presence and fulfilling their tasks for the legitimacy of the ceasefire treaty, the NNSC members contribute, despite the lack of a peace treaty, to maintaining peace on the Korean peninsula.